In 2139, the one world government known as the United Nations unanimously voted in favor of the Interstellar Federalization Initiative, formally recognizing all human colonies in space as interstellar states of Terra. Under this new federal government, the UN transformed itself into the Earth Colonies Federation, the first human interstellar civilization. As a result, all human colonies would receive global funding, resources, stateship, and a seat at the United Worlds Council, which was the governing body of the ECF based on Earth. For almost a century, humanity prospered under the ECF, transforming the 6 first interstellar colonies of Ursa Prime, Arcturus Delta, Mara 9, Savannah, D-Nav, and Talia, into bustling human worlds thriving with city life, agriculture, production, and interstellar trade. This time became known as the Golden Age, and in the latter half of the Golden Age, new human colonies were founded. Jos, Lithia, Retov, Vone, Gliese, and Biri Z6X. Humanity experienced great peace and prosperity, until 2222. In 2222, the United Worlds Council announced the discovery of an exotic matter known as zither on Gliese, which through scientific research was found to be an excellent energy source for wormhole travel. This sparked a prospecting frenzy not seen since the gold rush of the 1800s. Entrepreneurs far and wide sought to mine the matter in its raw crystalline form, known as a zither mound. This, however, hindered the terraforming operations of Hondan Enterprises. Gliese was previously selected as a planet for agriculture and grain storage. However, zither mining gradually destroyed the planet's habitability, reversing the terraforming progress. To make matters worse, the ECF began to divert much-needed resources from other worlds such as food and energy in order to launch a federal mining operation on Gliese. This mismanagement of resources would prove to be fatal. By 2236, famine became a widespread issue throughout the outer colonies, that is the colonies beyond the Sol system. A rift grew between the Terrans and those living in the frontier. As zither mining continued unhindered on Gliese, millions starved. The elites of the ECF became indifferent to their poorer constituents, as terraforming operations collapsed on Gliese and Biri Z6X due to food shortages. The oligarchs enjoyed much success, power, and wealth from the new enterprise, which made them unimaginably rich. In their hubris, which would be the straw that broke the camel's back, the United World Council members passed a resolution to remove their term limits and extend their terms in office for life, with the exception of Mars, which vetoed the move. With the ECF military-industrial complex benefiting from the booming zither economy, there was none who could oppose them for many years. However, that all changed in 2245, when then Captain Milo Balthazar received a prophetic vision. By some supernatural intervention, Balthazar was inspired to topple the ECF and bring back order and stability to the galaxy. With men under his command, he attempted to storm the UWC headquarters on Terra, resulting in his initial coup attempt failing, turning him into a fugitive in exile, and a celebrity amongst the lower classes. Balthazar bided his time while hiding on Vone, where he soon inspired many of the disenfranchised there to join his revolutionary band of outlaws known as the Scions of Earth. The Scions of Earth appealed to many, even those within the ECF military. The notion that the children of Earth should never be forgotten resonated with the masses. In a short time, the Scions of Earth became a formidable force, as more and more populations began to revolt in favor of the new military junta. The ECF became divided between the loyalists and the rebels. The widespread popularity of the Scions of Earth was poorly contained, as the oligarchs of the UWC on Terra grew increasingly less involved in governing matters and recused themselves to their fortress in Greenland. In 2246, the Scions of Earth managed to overthrow the ECF governments of Vone, Talia, Retov, Ursa Prime, and Arcturus Delta, leaving Terra exposed and in their crosshairs. Supreme Commander of the Scions of Earth, Milo Balthazar, ordered the final assault on the ECF capital world with his newly acquired armada, consisting of ECF defectors, mercenaries, outlaws, and revolutionaries from across the galaxy. The last to defect to the Scions of Earth was Governor Bolton Rice, the newly elected leader of Mars, who opened the floodgates to Earth in exchange for autonomy over his colony in whatever newly formed government would transpire as result of the coup. The Scions of Earth accepted and soon after began their liberation of Terra, starting what is known as the Battle for Terra. Although the Scions of Earth were successful in their campaign against the ECF forces on Terra by quickly overwhelming them with superior numbers, the oligarchs of the UWC Council ordered the unthinkable. Rather than face defeat, they ordered a complete strategic nuclear attack on all possible Scion positions, liberated cities, and ships in orbit. The end result was the detonation of over 3,000 megatons of TNT, resulting in the deaths of over 10 billion people, the contamination of Earth's biosphere with lethal amounts of radiation, and a near-permanent nuclear winter across the planet. Shortly after the battle, the Scions of Earth located the UWC Council on Greenland and raided their fortress, killing the council members. They were found to be phasing their consciousness with an advanced AI supercomputer known as the Oculus, which had enough Zither batteries to run for over 1 million years. The ECF rule over the galaxy was over, but at a great cost. After the Scions of Earth consolidated control over the remainder of the worlds, they formed into the Scion Empire in late 2246, with the Grand Scions declaring Supreme Commander Milo Balthazar as the first Scion Emperor. Through military might, service, honor, loyalty, and duty, the Scion Empire compelled the masses to strive in building a better future. Terraforming operations once again picked up, with Hondan Enterprises being contracted by the Scion Empire to repair the declining biomes of several colonies. Agriculture, manufacturing, and a strong mining industry in space thrived, revitalizing the economy across the galaxy. Soon thereafter, the Emperor began to crack down on bureaucratic laws and systems left over by the ECF, making it increasingly harder for elections to take place. Rather than electing representatives, Scion citizens entered the hierarchy of their government through merit and service to the cause. The spiritual connotations of the Emperor's rise to power and his endorsement of a supreme being moved many to adopt theological and religious beliefs. The consensus among the populations was that their victory was ordained by God. The atheism which predominantly ruled the early half of the 23rd century faded, as the latter half was marked by intense religious fervor and piety. For 20 years, the Scion Empire maintained order and security throughout the galaxy, with the exemption of ECF remnants on Gliese and Beery Z6X launching incursions into the Scion Empire from time to time. The Scion Empire brought a contrasting peace compared to the final decades of the ECF. Every man, woman, and child had what they needed to survive the unforgiving colonial life, and they had a purpose. In this time, the phrase "glory to God, glory to Cyan" was coined. However, there were many who were disgruntled with the Scion Empire. Those who were in the furthest reaches of the frontier were largely unaffected by the war between the ECF and Scion Empire. Although they struggled, they mostly found ways to survive through the famine. The colonies of Dinov, Lithia, Savannah, Artemis, and Joss suddenly found themselves under the strict rule of the Scion Empire. Elections were banned, government officials were replaced with Scion officials, and rights were revoked. Despite this, the Scion Empire's rule over these distant colonies was lackluster. For 20 years they focused on rebuilding the colonies closest to Terra, renaming Ursa Prime into Scion Prime, which became the capital of the Scion Empire, and Arcturus Delta into Scion Delta. Under the Scion regime, many liberally minded individuals became unruly. Scientists, intellectuals, former political scientists, economists, and others within the previous ECF framework disapproved of fundamental rights being stripped away. One could not question the Scion Empire or its leaders, one could not bear arms, and one could not hinder the Scion cause. Under the Emperor, humanity was to follow the Scion plan of unity, which required absolute adherence to the goals set forth by Balthazar. As a result, these dissidents created the Independent Colonies movement. The ICM was responsible for several riots, acts of public disobedience, and acts of vandalism across the Scion Empire between 2260 and 2265. To quell these disturbances, the Scion Empire established Scion military police units across the colonies. After waging a successful counterterrorism campaign against the ICM, they were no longer a threat. But rather than imprisoning the surviving dissidents, droves of fugitives were exiled to the frontier worlds. This in turn caused a mass migration of less unruly dissidents from the main colonies of the Scion Empire, to worlds like Dinov and Savannah. Many of these dissidents arrived to worlds like Lithia, which were relatively free of Scion Empire presence. Aside from the relatively small PDF presence, their lives were mostly unrestricted by imperial edicts. It was only a matter of time before elites within the Scion society saw cracks beginning to form, with many shadowy and wealthy investors taking interest in what was an opportunity to plant the seeds of a new interstellar nation, one which would eschew tyranny, and aspire to freedom. This idea of a new nation, one which could declare independence from the Scion Empire, became popular amongst those in the frontier, especially among Protestant Christians, libertarians, liberals, and colonial nationalists. Together with their elusive investors, they amassed resources and minds to make their independence possible. In order to appease the many different ideologies coming together to form this new nation, it was determined it would need to be a constitutional republic with a representative democracy, and so the amalgamate republic came to being. Instead of oligarchical politicians serving life terms as in the ECF Council, or unlike the dictator of the Scion Empire, the Republic would elect their leaders through an interplanetary census and vote system. As the planets of Dinov, Lithia, Jos, Savannah, and Artemis collectively voted to secede, they announced a national militia program to enlist as many able-bodied men into the armed forces as possible in order to deter Scion Empire aggression, and with this they declared independence. Within days, most of the frontier SCPDF forces were overwhelmed by AR militias and populations, many of which surrendered peacefully due to being completely outnumbered. The response from the Scion Empire was kinetic. In an interstellar speech demanding the immediate surrender of AR traitors, Emperor Balthazar threatened war within 3 days should the AR collaborators not turn themselves in. The warning fell on deaf ears, and as a result Emperor Balthazar authorized a military policing action on Artemis on April 5, 2267. In what became known as the start of the Scion Conflict, the 10th Scion Guard Expeditionary Force was engaged by rebel forces of the 103rd Regiment of Militia when attempting to seize contested facilities and townships. The subsequent war that would follow after this small and brief skirmish between the forces of the Amalgamate Republic and the Scion Empire would be one of the most devastating conflicts in human history.